I will start from a simple question, that is behind all the conference. Why we need technology? Especially why we need technology for changing people. We know that both clinical practice and training requires change. However, we know very well that apart from cybertherapy attendance, not so much people is interested to use technology to change. If you ask my colleagues if they want to use virtual reality, many of them say, oh, it's very cool, but I prefer to use this kind of technology. No hassles, no problem, no cable. So a critical issue for moving forward is to understand why virtual reality can be helpful in supporting change. So my speech is split in two. In the first part, I will tell you more about the reflection behind virtual reality and change, trying to understand some more about what has been learned from cognitive science. In the second part, I will tell you how the technology we created, NeuroVR 1.5, may be helpful for that. Well, what we know about virtual reality? We know that it's not a novel technology. Even if we know it's cool, the history of virtual reality is long. We know that the first application of virtual reality is now 20 years old, that the first clinical application of virtual reality is 15 years old. And we know also that a lot of researchers are working in virtual reality. However, if we check the way in which virtual reality is used to change people, there is no a real answer. What we know from clinical practice, I will start from clinical practice because it's a cybertherapy conference. We know that it's the focus, the reflection of the subject on the issue, the critical issue, that is the starting point for change. We know that a key point is the possibility of relive again the situation, critical situation, and try to attach to it any more possible cues, emotional, cognition, and so on. Well, in therapy, you have many ways of doing that. According to the different psychotherapy approach you have, you can choose between many of them. You can have cognitive behavioral approach, you can have psychoanalysis, you have interpersonal therapy, and so on. It's interesting that most of them work, in the sense that most of them are able to change people. But what is behind all of them? Well, I recently came in contact with the lecture made by Professor Kahneman, who recently received a Nobel Prize for economy. It's interesting that economists were more curious about change than psychologists, than clinical psychologists. And his work was focused mainly on how we address information from outside. And what is interesting for us is the idea that our brain is split in two. There are two different systems working together. One is based on reasoning. It's what typically is addressed from cognitive behavioral therapy. The other one is less focused on. It's typically addressed in psychoanalysis, the idea of intuition, the idea that emotions are important for change. And he was able to create a model that I suggest to have a look at, in which both perception and intuition are behind reasoning. So when we have to face how to help people to change, how to help people to have better reasoning, the idea is that we have to focus on both systems, both on perception and both on intuition, and this is not so common. Interestingly, the idea that there are two different systems that help us in facing the real life is very clear in this problem, that we know that it's typical in patients, that patients know very well what they have to do, but they don't have any idea about how to do that. So you can have verbal knowledge, you can know you don't have task knowledge, so you don't have idea how to do that. This problem that is very common in therapy is probably due to this, that there are two different systems, and if you are not able to address both of them, people do not change.